Those of you who know me at all know that I just as soon talk about babies, puppy dogs, and rainbows, right? There's something happy and cheerful about that, and I love that part. However, reality is that things are a little mixed up right now in our world. And so we need to find the wisdom to know the difference between what we accept and what we can change. And that was really a perfect opening song. Interestingly enough, Deepak Chopra wrote this book, Peace is the Way, in 2005. And he wrote it back then as a reminder that the choices we face each and every single day set us on a path of war or on a path of consciousness and peace, literally and figuratively, because the personal choices that we make manifest in the outer world as a collective consciousness. Does that make sense to you? That if enough people think about one thing, right, it becomes that thing. He also tells us that the path of peace is a practical project. It's about personal transformation. We each get to participate in how peace shows up because that process is within. It's internal. It's within us. And the way of peace is based upon a leap of consciousness by the many. Something that I know every person here is ready to do and ready to be. Because it is about action, right? We can be that. We also need to do that and participate. If you and I demonstrate that peace is much more satisfying than chaos, then that collective consciousness can't help but shift. Yes, we're a small group of people. However, if each one of us touch somebody with that idea and that thought, all of a sudden it's doubled. And that's how we need to look at it, one person at a time. Because when we, as humanity, go deep enough into that way of peace, we're going to find an amazing amount of power there. We'll be achieving that freedom and that adventure that life meant for us. We can expand our consciousness without taking a single thing from anybody else. And at the same time, you're giving that gift of the essence of who you are to anybody who will accept it. Chopra talks about 3 different ideas that I really resonated with. Well, he talked about a lot in the book, but 3 different ideas that I really resonated with. They're Sanskrit words that come from the ancient Vedic texts. First one is Siva, the idea that your actions harm no one and benefit everyone. And Simran, you remember your true nature and your purpose for being here. And the third one is the satsang, that you belong to a community of wisdom and of peace. So this morning I want to really focus on Siva, because that brings that joy of knowing that your daily actions can support life as a whole. And through Siva, what we're doing is we're consciously becoming part of the planet's evolution as opposed to its destruction. And as we live in peace, and as we are that peace, we fulfill our duty to be a steward of every aspect of nature, down to the most sacred level. So Siva's most basic component is a shift in our self-image to a higher level. We need to recognize and know who we are and operate from that particular space. We don't want people feeling uncomfortable about stepping out from a crowd because they're different, or being labeled because they're different. We don't want people having that sense of isolation because they can't find others who believe in life and love and God the same way they do. And I know most of you here have experienced that particular idea. if we commit ourselves to having even a fraction of confidence in life, in the future of our world, we will stop feeling weak. We will stop feeling vulnerable. We will stop feeling alone. There are so many spiritual communities that have sprung up over the past decade, similar to ours, where people understand and accept the idea of oneness. It's huge because we are all consciously guiding humanity to a peaceful future, to a peaceful world. And that is so necessary and so needed, in particular at this time. Seva is that aspect of action, service, charity, volunteering, outreach, mentoring, healing, animal rights, conscientious objectors, all of that stuff. And my best guess is that everyone in this room is either involved in or has been involved in one of those things at a very deep, committed level. And every one of those actions express that desire to offer service to humanity through altruistic actions. And that's what it's going to take to bring people together, to bring humanity, to have them recognize the oneness, that oneness and the diversity, and how important that really is to all of us. It's not about being motivated by money. It's not about being motivated by self-importance. It's about being motivated through love, through forgiveness, through understanding. What we find out by practicing Seva is that the one performing the service, those altruistic actions, it is shifting you as much as it is shifting the person that you're working with. This is about breaking out of the trap of ego, out of selfishness, out of money. It's recognizing that we're all one, that we're all connected. It's to embrace humanity and to express that divine that is inherent in all of us. The notion that the world will change if enough people raise their consciousness is absolutely true, and no one can tell me any different. I believe that head to toe. Because the world that we live in is built by consciousness. Now, I want you to think about that just for a moment. The world we live in is built by consciousness. And that's because the world is how we see it. And we all see it a little differently, don't we? So if we want a new world, we are at a huge advantage with what it means to create that shift in consciousness. So I want to talk about how to do this, how to birth that new world according to Chopra into that higher consciousness. He talks about 7 building blocks that we need to really focus on in order to understand and recognize the power that we hold. He said if we believe something strongly enough, we begin to see it. Now that's the simple law of attraction, isn't it? He also reminded us that Jesus and Buddha both believed that mental process could alter reality. Why can't we? Emotions, he says, want to flow in freedom without anxiety, without the constant need to be vigilant toward our enemies. For example, to feel the anguish of war and the compassion for its victims is a force that wants to create change. Now, I can only speak for me, but during this week, my heart was heavy over every single tragedy. They were all terrible and painful. To give our thoughts and our emotions a purpose, we need to add intention to that. We all know the power of intention. That comes from a really deep place within us. It clears the way for its own fulfillment. It's not about wanting something to stop. It is about intending something new to replace the old. Doesn't that make sense? We do that through relationships. Consciousness needs to flow outward, and this happens through relationships. We can't bring about a peaceful world unless we're relating in our relationships peacefully. A world at peace comes about when we can relate to each other as peaceful beings, one person at a time. And as consciousness does its work, the old way things were done start to weaken. They start to break down because it no longer makes any sense. Those old patterns seem to dissipate. We begin to see light instead of darkness. And I know that's what we all want to see. And Chopra puts it this way, it was beautiful. A breakthrough gives us a glimpse of light. A turning point actually alters the shape of time. Our environment, it's kind of sick. And my personal belief is it's been wounded by careless human behavior, quite frankly. As a whole, right? The whole planet, not you and I. Nature is a living, breathing expression of consciousness, and it adapts to our evolution as we adapt to it. In other words, the physical world mirrors our own problems, our own wounds. And when there are enough people who have healed themselves, I absolutely believe the environment will mirror that as well. As within, so without. We've all heard that one, right? So he says that the seventh item is vision. And when the previous 6 elements, those other 6 elements are in place, vision moves forward because it's rooted in our consciousness and it must come to fruition. Things must shift. So these factors have to all be present and active for a world to be born, a new world to be born. And whenever consciousness is ready for a shift, you know what we see? Agitation, chaos, and turmoil in those particular areas. And that's what we're seeing right now in the world. Those very things. So I believe on my better days, when I can see the light, that means that we are on the edge of changing the collective consciousness. That the chaos we see, without question, will absolutely turn into order. It's its nature to do so. We can relate to that because we've all had upheavals in our lives. Things that just happen and continue to happen, and we think it will never end. And just when we think we're at that point where we can't take anymore, it's like something magically happens and things calm down. The situation seems to work itself out. Now, one thing I know I can state with some absolute certainty is that most of us, many of us, are guilty in believing in that legendary monster, them. Right? Them. We forget that in our day-to-day encounters, sometimes that when we pause and we look into the face of somebody, whether we like them or not, we tend to forget that, as it turns out, each and every person is a human being. And the way of peace teaches that no one is your enemy. Not in reality, and especially not on a spiritual level. Chopra relayed a story about this in this book, and I am going to share it with you. In June 1945, the Allies landed in Normandy, something very interesting happened. The average GI wouldn't fire their gun at the Germans defending the beaches. even under direct order, even with a commanding officer walking up and down the line and shouting out that order to fire, only about 1 in 25 of those soldiers would shoot. That wasn't publicized. It was, however, discussed in a U.S. Army report. And in that report, the reason that they didn't fire, because the GIs couldn't shoot the advancing Germans. They saw them as human beings. These men had been taught all of their life it was against God's law to kill. And that teaching was nearly impossible for most of them to overcome, even in the heat of battle. Our inherent nature does not want to destroy, contrary to what it is we're seeing out there, contrary to what the media tells us. There was another story that I read some years ago I want to share with you too, because it really struck me, and it reminds me that when we have an open mind, with God all things are possible, right? There's no limitation. And that's about this B-17 bomber. It was used in World War II. And it was called the Flying Fortress because the artillery load and the ability to withstand enemy fire was huge. So this crew had just completed a mission, and a German fighter jets had descended on them with a storm of these cannons just firing. So the plane was hit by several of the shells. So the crew finally got to the ground and they surveyed the damage, and it had been hit by 7 of those cannon shells. 3 were still intact. And the men realized as they were looking at their plane that it wasn't just the fact that this was a sturdy plane that saved them. The cannons had been made at an armaments plant in Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. And the Czech people were absolutely forced to provide labor. It was certainly not an option. Of the 3 shells that were retrieved from this bomber, 2 were blanks, and the 3rd one had a note. And the note said, "This is our way of helping." Isn't that a great story? There is an instinctive knowing that we are one, that we are all connected, that we're all in this life together to support each other, to love each other, to take care of one another. And that idea, with a bit of ingenuity, we realize there are no limitations. And that is a perfect demonstration of Siva, that those actions harm no one and benefit everyone. So let's make this a little more personal now. What is it we can do on a daily basis to rise our consciousness up to that level of peace, of love, of kindness, of compassion, of understanding, of awe and forgiveness, all those things that we want to be? Well, we can do plenty. We can take 5 minutes every single day to meditate for peace. 5 minutes. It makes a huge difference. You sit quietly, close your eyes, place your attention on that peace, on love, on laughter, right? That always feels really good, and love. Allow those words to really radiate through your heart, throughout your entire body, into your own consciousness. Feel them and experience them. Make that commitment. And then at the end of that 5-minute meditation, say to yourself, I will relinquish all resentment and all grievances. Here's the catch. You need to actually do it though, right? Not just say it. Again, it's about action. Think peace. It has so much power when it's backed by your intention. Introduce that intention of peace in your everyday thoughts. Chopra shares a really great ancient prayer in this book I'm going to share with you. Let me be loved. Let me be happy. let me be peaceful. Let my friends be happy, loved, and peaceful. Let my perceived enemies be happy, loved, and peaceful. Let all beings be happy, loved, and peaceful. Let the whole world experience these things. So, now that you've heard it, I'm going to invite you to experience it. I want to go through it again, and I invite you to maybe just close your eyes and feel these words this time. Don't just hear them, feel them. Let me be loved. Let me be happy. Let me be peaceful. Let my friends be happy, loved, and peaceful. Let my perceived enemies be happy, loved, and peaceful. Let all beings be happy, loved, and peaceful. Let the whole world experience these things. That's how we can be peace, by actually practicing it, incorporating it into our everyday life. So I'm going to close this morning with an excerpt from the book, Peace is the Way. Developing peace consciousness is a practical project, and the more of us who engage in it every day, the more momentum we add to the future. The future doesn't exist in time. It isn't a place over the horizon of tomorrow. The future is the next shape that consciousness takes. A flower is the future of a seed. It takes time for the seed to turn into a flower, but in truth, the pattern mapped out in the planet's genes controls time. It uses it to bring about a reality already deeply imprinted. Peace consciousness, once imprinted in our minds, can use time exactly the same way, as a stage for unfolding that was fully shaped in advance. That is who you are. Thank you so much for being here while I shared this truth as I understand it.